tonight. We're going to dive into some of the legislation, not all of it, because Chris Allen here who works with me. We looked at what, Chris, 400 pieces of education legislation over
Yep.
the last month or so that was introduced. And that's a chore, to be honest with you, because you got to read the language, and reading legislation is you can pull your eyes out. It's kind of brutal. So anyway, we did that, and we could be talking about a lot of different bills, but we're not gonna. We're gonna touch on the bills that are important to the VEOA, especially our priority legislation. I have a small PowerPoint, and so that you guys can follow what I'm talking about, and then we can get into questions about that. So let me share my screen. And I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. For some of you may not know me. I'm Craig DeSessa. I am the executive director of the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance, and I'm also president of the Middle Resolution Policy Foundation, which the VEOA is a project of. Um, so if you'll bear with me here, I've got to figure out how to get to that screen. There it is. Okay. Let's see here. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So what I'd like to begin with is legislation that the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance endorsed. Some of this we wrote, actually, Chris wrote, and I'll just tell you a little bit about what's happened with it. So HB 1164 was the House version of our Education Excellence for All, ESA, which was a limited eligibility bill. It was for underserved communities, low-income communities. And then there was SB 533 was the same bill, but in the Senate. And both those bills got what they call laid on the table. I think that was what they did with these bills. And basically, it's a nice way of saying they've killed our legislation. But it wasn't without plenty of good testimony from our folks. Over the years, we've been doing this now. I think this is probably our 10th General Assembly where we've introduced education savings accounts. And slowly, especially in the last 2 or 3 years since we formed the VEOA, the testimonies have been quite um, quite effective in the sense that they're letting people know, especially Democrats, that they want this type of legislation in their communities. I'm going to share one testimony near the end to sort of demonstrate sort of what we're seeing from especially the underserved communities. But we're having great success there, and we're slowly but surely educating people, and they're starting to talk about this. They're starting to say, "Hey, this is something we could use in our communities." There were several other ESA bills that were introduced as well. We had Delegate Freitas introduced the same bill that we introduced last year, which was more of a universal bill. And then Delegate Tim Griffin, who's brand new delegate, introduced a full universal. In other words, every kid in Virginia, doesn't matter if they were in public school, doesn't matter where they were at this moment in their education, they could qualify for an ESA. Now, just so you know, that is the ideal. That would be our target down the road. Arizona introduced their first ESA in 2011, and it was more limited than the bill we had this year. And now they have universal ESAs in Arizona. So this is something that takes time. You have to demonstrate something like this works. And once you do, you start getting people on board that normally wouldn't be on board in the beginning. So in Virginia, we're going to start small, especially because Democrats control both chambers right now. And I don't anticipate Republicans ever controlling both chambers and the governor's mansion anytime in the near future. I mean, we're talking decades out. It's just Virginia's a purple state. And so we have to bring Democrats on board. And we have a plan, a strategy for that. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But all of these bills were laid on the table by a majority vote by Democrats. There is one Republican who in the House voted to do the same. She's a bit of a challenge with Delegate Coiner, is not a fan of what we're trying to do. And if anybody in this audience is in her district, I'd love to hear from you, because we need to reach out to her, and she needs to hear from people in her district about this. Um, Another bill that we asked Delegate Scott to carry was a tax credit bill for home education in private school. Basically, it would allow you to write off as a tax credit on your state liability, so your taxes that you owe to the state of Virginia, any education expenses you might have, whether it be tuition, a curriculum if you're homeschooler, if you're paying for a micro school, whatever. Now it was limited. I think the maximum was going to be around $2,500, $3,000, but it's something. And I know homeschoolers especially would appreciate this because curriculum costs money. Same with private school. So anyway, we introduced that, and Chris, it was a limited eligibility. No, we had, that's right. We allowed
It was
low
20,
income.
it
Go
was
ahead.
it was 200% of poverty was a cutoff, and if you were below 200% of poverty, it was a refundable tax credit, which meant that if the person that was applying did not have sufficient taxes to meet and I think the number was $4,000, then they actually got money from the state. So the lower income parent would get more money. And for those above 200%, it was 50% of, I think, the SOQ funding, which meant that the limit was $2,500 for them. It was 50% of $5,000.
Yeah, yeah. So, and that bill, of course, didn't survive the subcommittee either. Then there was HB 1275, which creates, which was actually help. I'm sorry. That bill was patroned by Mark Early, and that was trying to increase the, people that educate homeschoolers or in private school that spend their own money to help educate the students could have a tax credit. It's now $500. He was trying to increase it to $1,500, and it got killed. So anyway, that's some of the legislation that we got behind at the General Assembly. Bills that are still alive, and this is not all of them, but this is some of the ones that I think would be of interest to this crowd. There is a open enrollment bill that was watered down. Initially, it started off pretty strong, and I'm going to let Lindsay Z from Virginia Institute for Public Policy, because she's been following this closely, share a little bit about this bill and what's going on with it. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Yeah. So with HB 659, it started out saying that school districts in Virginia shall permit open enrollment, meaning that any student that was in a district assigned to a school zone could attend another school within that district. But what happened was the bill was amended to say that they may use open enrollment, which is what the current policy is right now. Already school districts are allowed to choose to allow open enrollment if they want. And then it was further amended to say that so there's another section of the bill that asks the Department of Education at the state level to create some guidelines and best practices so that if school boards were choosing to do open enrollment within their district, then they could have just some standards to go to cross-reference how the best way to go about doing that process is and accepting applications and things along those lines. So they decided to take out everything in the bill except that one section that asks the Department of Education to put together some guidelines about open enrollment practices. And so that's what ended up going forward. But there was a discussion when the bill came up, because there was one line in there that talks about tuition. And so there was discussion in the committee about whether or not tuition is currently allowed if a student is attending a school outside their school zone, if the school that they choose to attend is allowed to charge for them to attend that school. And it was determined by the lawyer in the committee that was assisting the committee And one of the delegates that did their research that the current Virginia law is that tuition is prohibited with these open enrollment situations. So there was a line in the bill that just said the Department of Education, when they write up their guidelines, they need to emphasize in there that currently school boards are not allowed to charge that schools aren't allowed to charge tuition for open enrollment. However, so this bill went through fine. It passed on the House floor. There was a companion bill that said exactly the same thing on the Senate side. And when the bill came up in the Senate in committee, there was concern over this exact same issue with tuition. But they didn't realize during their committee discussion that tuition is currently prohibited in the law. They thought that this bill was saying that schools wouldn't be allowed to charge tuition, and they thought that schools might not be able to recuperate some of their costs if they were to change that practice. And so, just under a misunderstanding, really, of what the current law says about tuition, they decided to kill that bill in the Senate, and so it didn't go forward. So that's what the story is with this bill. The HB 659 passed the House, will go to Senate committee. And so those educators, or sorry, not educators, those legislators hopefully can get some better information by the time that this bill goes through that committee so that they'll pass this one. But those are
This is
some of the details.
Thank you, Lindsay. And this is what we see down at the General Assembly a lot. You start off with a strong bill, really trying to make a difference, and then they just basically pare it way down so it doesn't really have an impact. As we all know, the Virginia Education Association, the School Board Association, the Superintendents Association, the Commonwealth Institute, they all oppose anything that threatens their monopoly. And so this even would threaten it to some degree. The open enrollment was strictly in district, right? It was not interdistrict, right?
Right, in district.
So anyway, that's what's going on there. So unfortunately, I think that bill is probably not going to provide a lot of help for students. This is a good bill, and this has gotten bipartisan support. Open enrollment for foster children. So if a foster child is in a foster home, and he starts school or she starts school in a certain school district, and then he's moved to another foster home, he has or she has the option of staying at that school that they started at, even though they may have moved to a different district. And that has been getting bipartisan support. Obviously, it doesn't impact a ton of people, a ton of children, but it will impact some. It could be very beneficial. So that is a very positive piece of legislation. SB 199, workforce credentials. Basically, what this bill does is it allows students who take not continuing education, but what's the word I'm looking for, Chris? Trades type classes in their district, that those classes could be used for credit to graduation. So that bill has gotten quite a bit of support. I think it may have even been in the Senate 40-0. So it's gotten good bipartisan support. So what this does is just it really helps kids who may not be academically inclined, but may be more trades inclined to get their high school diploma, which is it's important because we all know we need a trades workforce pretty seriously. Next is this one allows students that live in a district where junior ROTC programs exist. If it doesn't exist at your high school, but it exists in another high school in your district, you're allowed to go to that other high school to use the JROTC program. I didn't realize that was the case. I thought kids could do that. And maybe some districts do it already, but this requires the school boards to offer that across the state. So again, another positive piece of choice legislation. Limited, obviously, but it does help those kids who like the ROTC. Let's see here, HB 281, waiver regulations for office buildings to start preschool. So this seems sort of innocuous, but there are office buildings that have space where you could start a preschool. Now, why did I put this in here? It's because micro schools are starting to pop up that utilize that are applying for a waiver underneath the preschool regulations. So if somebody wanted to start a micro school, they could, instead of trying to go through all the regulations to having to start a private school or something like that, they could get a waiver to start a preschool, but then they could expand that preschool into K through 12. But it's a micro school. It's not, it's not a fully accredited school. And so this just opens up more locations for these folks, these entrepreneurs, what we call them education entrepreneurs, to start micro schools. And we're aware of this because there is a micro school in New York. I've forgotten the name of it, but it's in a church now. But the woman the founder, she has applied for this waiver, so she can avoid a lot of different regulations. So it's great to see, and I think this has got great bipartisan support. And I don't think most people understand the significance of this for micro schools, which is just fine. We're trying to avoid any kind of regulations on micro schools down to General Assembly. And fortunately, we haven't seen any this year because micro schools are really starting. If you haven't heard or seen about them, they're really starting to proliferate across the country, but not only the country, in Virginia as well. We're finding out about more and more about micro schools that have started up, and I know we haven't seen all of them. There's quite a few. So you've got people that are being creative. They're entrepreneurs because they're trying something new in this market, and it's pretty exciting. And we're going to be focused on trying to promote those in the future. These are two bills, House and Senate companions, that concern us quite a bit for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons is in the Senate, I believe it passed 40-0. That means Republicans are on board. Chris, do you want to share with everybody here a little bit about our concerns about community schools?
Briefly, I will. But fundamentally, this whole notion started 3 or 4 years ago. So there are, I think, several of these, 2 of these in existence. But the idea is to establish a school as a central point in a community that is the provider of all sorts of services to the children in that school and their families. So we're talking about healthcare, feeding the child, even up through high school. You could apply for to vote through the school. So it's making it a central system of the community. So the idea is, if you're thinking about this with pre-kindergarten activities going on, I think it was last year or the year before, all pre-kindergarten and issues with students have been moved to the Virginia Department of Education. This is the cradle to grave system that everybody will become dependent upon as we move forward, and we'll have total control of our children.
Yeah, and so just to be clear on this bill, this was a bill to create the Department of Community Schools in the VDOE,
Right.
where they would then start to provide grants to schools that applied for the grant to create a community school. Chris and I met with a couple of gentlemen. This has been, I don't know, 6 years ago, who invested. They were wealthy businessmen who invested in one elementary school in Richmond. It was called Richmond Elementary School. And what they did was they worked with a nonprofit that, and then what they did was they provided all of these services: mental health, food, healthcare, you name it, transportation, all this stuff. And I think it was a 3-year investment, and they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when we were meeting with them to try to get them to support some of the work we're doing, they said they were so disappointed because they didn't move the needle. But there's a big push for these community schools. The VEA is all over this. I've asked for data on this. Yeah, has this worked? Is this working? Of course, they say it is, but at the same time, I've not seen any data on it. So we need to continue to dive down this road. But my biggest concern is that you have Republicans believing that this is a good idea. And Chris made it the comment, it's cradle to grave. It really is putting people on government dependence for their life. Once they learn how to do it, K through 12, I mean, that's what they're going to do going into the future and into adulthood. So that's a concerning move that's going on. And I've got a feeling the governor's not going to veto this bill because you got Republicans supporting it. And that's a real concern. We're going to let them know we're opposed to this, but I'm not so sure what's going to happen. All right, so those are some of the bills that are still alive. So that's a sort of a positive thing. Um, I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing moving forward. I feel very good about our chances of getting robust education choice here in Virginia. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them, and I mentioned it earlier, is that we're seeing more and more interest in what we're doing, especially in those communities that truly need other education options. So our strategy is going to, there's several what I call prongs here, but we're going to continue to grow our grassroots movement in Richmond. We are presently interviewing some people to become our community engagement director in Richmond. This is designed to be a full-time position, somebody in the community who has the time to take on this effort. And what we're trying to do is grow a huge grassroots movement amongst parents within the Richmond area. When we sit in front of people that are in Richmond, in the projects or RPS, Richmond Public School, teachers, administrators, and we share with them what this is about. This is the first time they've heard the truth about what education choice is about. The first response we always get is, "Well, we need more funding in our schools." That's always the first response. And then when you talk to them and you start asking them questions like, "Well, is it more funding, or does the funding need to be appropriated differently? Are the schools mismanaged?" Well, nobody will disagree with that because they know that they are. So then you're starting to open up a conversation, starting to open people's minds. And every time we do this, almost every time we do this with parents or people in the community, they start to nod their head and they're going, this is interesting. I've met with so many different leaders in the community, ministry leaders, people that run nonprofits that work with these kids, and they're all like, wow, this is something we need to have in Richmond. So we've got to grow this, and they've got to then, over time, develop relationships with their legislators, and we know who they are. And they're all Democrats in Richmond, obviously. And there's some top leaders in the Black Caucus, in the General Assembly and so forth in Richmond, who we're beginning to start relationships with. So this is, it's just going to take time. We've always assumed that we'll never have control. I think I mentioned this earlier, of both chambers and the governor's mansion, or we won't for a long, long time. So we have to bring Democrats on board. The second thing that we're going to really focus on is growing a small Black church coalition. I've heard this in two areas in the country where they are able to get some school choice passed: Washington, D.C., and in Florida. Once there was a funding stream available, and that's what the ESA would be, once there was a funding stream available, small churches started to open small schools. And I was told in Florida by Michael Benjamin, who was part of that effort, and some of you may know who Michael is. He was involved back in 1999 and 2000 in Florida. He said once we provided a funding stream through the students, he said over 50 schools opened up within a number of years through churches. And so I know that this will be a huge, these pastors will be interested in what we're doing. Another example is in Massachusetts. They just started opening up micro schools in churches, and they've got now 17 that have started. The Massachusetts Family Institute, which is basically our family foundation, is or the Massachusetts Family Institute, has started this movement. And I've been talking with their folks there about how they've done it. And I think I'm gonna try to bring one of them in to meet with some of these pastors to share, hey, this is the model, this is what you can do. They agreed that if we could get an ESA passed, that it would explode, because again, there's funding available. And so we're going to be growing that coalition. I met with Dr. Dwayne Hardy the other day, who was in Richmond, or excuse me, he's in Henrico County, and he's very interested in getting involved in this, and he has a connection to all these small churches. So that's a pretty exciting piece of this. But if we can get the pastors involved, that makes a huge difference. Emily Ann Gullickson, who's our deputy secretary of education used to run the ESA in Arizona. And she said to Chris and I one day on a call, she said, it's when the ESA really started to take off is when the pastors started to get involved. So that's an important piece of this. The second thing is we are going to have to meet with Democrat leaders, because there is going to get them on board. We got to start having conversations with them. And they're not going to flip over all of a sudden and realize, oh, we need to vote for this. They're going to want something in exchange. And so we have to start that dialogue. What is it they want? And what can we do to help them at the same time? So I remember talking to, you guys remember Virginia Walden Ford. Miss Virginia, she was on one of these calls not too long ago, and she told me, I asked her, I said, how did this all happen in DC? What was sort of the process? And she said, in the end, we did have to concede. The Democrats wanted more money for the DC public schools. And she said, it really irritated me because she said, I knew that it would be wasted money. But at the same time, in order to get our scholarship program passed, we were going to have to negotiate. So these are realities of politics. And so we're going to have to start meeting with these leaders. And I've already started meeting with Lamont Bagby. Senator Bagby is the head of the Black Legislative Caucus. He's very much a partisan. He doesn't want to see Republicans have any victories. So he's going to be a tough nut to crack. But I believe that if you get enough people contacting him in his district, he's going to start to listen. And we do have he and I have a mutual friend that has been trying to bring us together, because this friend of ours, Mark James, you guys, some of you may know Dr. James. Mark is very close to the senator, and he said to me the other day at lunch, he said, Craig, we're just going to have to develop. You're just going to have to develop a relationship with Lamont and others in the Black Caucus, and to start having conversations. So that's another prong on this effort. And I believe it can be done. Democrats across the country are starting to get on board. You may have heard about the Democrat in Georgia, Black lady who became a new delegate, I believe a delegate, and she saw what was going on, and she said, and it was all over school choice. She switched parties because she saw the importance of having school choice in Georgia. It's happened in North Carolina as well. Democrat flipped over this issue. We're seeing in Pennsylvania, they're starting to see some exciting things on school choice. The governor there has spoken about being supportive of it. His actions haven't demonstrated that yet because of the pressure he was getting from the unions. But at the same time, they're having conversations up there. So we are seeing this to some degree across the country. And the last thing, as I've talked about, momentum is building. With Todd Gatke, many of you may know Todd. He is the government affairs person at the Family Foundation. He has been in this fight longer than just about anybody. He ran the tax credit program here in Virginia when it first got passed in 2012, 2013. And he came to me after the House hearing, or maybe it was the Senate hearing. But anyway, he said, Craig, I know we lost today, but he said, I've been at this a while. And he said, I am seeing momentum growing for this issue. And he said, it's just a matter of time. And I'm in complete agreement with him. We're going to have robust educational choice is coming to Virginia. And it's just a matter of time. We have to be persistent at this. And we have to keep our heads up and keep moving forward and continue to get the word out that we have to get the word out about education choice, because so many people don't know about it. So the last thing I'll share with you before we can get into questions is I want to encourage everybody on this call to continue having conversations with their friends. Send them to the VEO website so they can learn. We have tremendous resources on there, and they can sign the petition. We have a growing petition going on right now, and we just got to keep talking about it. I mean, letters to the editor, op-eds in your local towns if you're up to it, and if you need help with one. I think we even have a couple of model letters to the editor on the website, as I recall, and we'll be more than happy to help you. We'll draft something for you if you want to submit it to your local newspaper. But we have to continue this fight, and eventually we're going to have lots of educational options for parents here in Virginia.
Let's try one more time.
So when we hear I
Is
call
that
it
any
the
better?
propaganda that when
Yes.
a child leaves the school and the funding follows them, that is true. That's what's supposed to happen. Okay, so when we say children leave schools, the money should follow them. We're not defunding public schools. We're funding and investing in children. So that narrative needs to stop right here. There is no such thing as defunding public schools. Public schools are not underfunded. They're severely mismanaged. Okay, I have 18 budgets that I've examined over the last 10 years in Virginia, and we have given millions back in federal funding. Do your homework, delegates. Do your homework. Don't believe what VK says, what the School Board Association says. It is not true. Public schools are not underfunded. They are mismanaged. Continuing to give them money is like giving an addicted person money and expecting them to pay the rent. It's not going to happen. Okay, so I want to get us clear on this, and this is based on the evidence. Our communities deserve opportunities to educate our children as we see fit. Okay, schools are not working for our children. They're not working for us.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay, for making that work. So what you saw there, at least what I see, is passion. Somebody who really cares. And this is what we're seeing more and more across the Richmond area. We've seen it in Petersburg. We've even seen it in Hampton Roads and Virginia Beach, where parents are just, they've had enough and they want to see changes made. Real pleased. Candace has been working with us for the last year or so. I think Keisha, you were the one who introduced me to her initially up here in Hanover one night at an event. So thank you for that. Yeah. So, all right, everybody, listen, thank you so much for your time, and feel free to go to our website and learn more about what we're trying to do. And you're going to hear from us. We're going to continue these calls every month, and we'll be reporting on what's happening in the General Assembly. And we've got a year from now to really work hard and try to develop what Keisha talked about, developing that movement where the parents, not us, the parents are going and talking to the legislators that represent them. All right, everybody, have a wonderful night. Take care.